Today I want to look at the film Prometheus, and a lot of people have seen it and have felt very upset and unfulfilled, saying that it raises too many questions. And if you really look through the whole Alien series, though, there's not a lot of questions that get fully answered, because even watching the first movie from the late 70s, I mean, look at that thing. What is that thing? Can you tell me? Because I can't tell you, and I saw this for the first time when I was 8, and it still haunts my dreams to this day. Also, if you look at what aliens look like, I thought for a long time when I was younger and first watching the films that the aliens themselves were actually some kind of human mutated science experiment, because they have the same types of, arms and legs, and also the rib cages and the spines that are very prevalent and visible. So Prometheus, like a lot of the other alien films, leaves a lot to the imagination and a lot of answers that you are not handed like you are so often in Hollywood. So you have to kind of dig deeper and think about it a little more. And there is a lot left unexplained, and one of the big questions that a lot of people have is, was Charlize Theron's character, Captain Meredith Vickers, was she a human or was she an android like David? And there's really evidence to suggest that it could go either way, which I'm sure was done intentionally, and it's something that we will probably never get a solid answer to. It was one of those, well, what do you think happened at the end kind of stories. But as far as her being a human, let's look at some of the reasons as to why she seems human. One of the first times that we find her, she does go into hypersleep, and then she gets up and she's exercising because of, atrophy that happens when you don't use your limbs for a long time. Now, if she was an android, there would be no reason for her to need to regenerate her muscles, because they would be, pretty much like pre-programmed. They would be set, defined objects in her body that would never deteriorate. And so that really says for human. There's also a part where she is talking with the ship's pilot, and she, after he kind of pokes the question out there, like, well, we think you're a robot, ha ha ha, she offers to have sex with him. And we never see if that happens or not. It's kind of implied it doesn't happen, but it's still, why would she offer to have sex if she couldn't do it and she was a robot? And, of course she could have pulled him to the side and killed him, but then who would have flown the ship? It doesn't make sense, We also see her wear a spacesuit, and I believe she spends quite a few minutes or seconds on screen trying to struggle getting it on. So why would that be needed if you don't breathe oxygen to begin with? We also see when Waylon is talking about David, the one who is actually disclosed as a full-on android, Vickers seems kind of jealous about it. And then later she calls Waylon father and bows to him. And it seems kind of like the father thing could go either way, because when she's bowing to him, that it could be something where it's like respect for your parent, or it could be a pre-programmed thing of, this is my God, this is my king, I bow to him. So that could go either way, and the father thing, of course, could go either way, because that could be her biological daughter that's very jealous that he felt like, oh, well, you're not a boy, so I made a robot son because you weren't a boy. Or it could be that, her and David are the exact same level of both being androids. So that could go either way. And at the end of the film, we see her get crushed to death, and she seems very terrified for that to happen, which again would not make a lot of sense for an android, because when we see David get killed earlier in the film, it's no big deal for him. I mean, he doesn't even really think twice about it. And now if you look at reasons why, Vickers might be an android, she throws David around at one point when she gets really frustrated with him, which is a pretty human emotion, but she seems very angry, and she throws David around against the ship like he's a little doll. And if you look in other alien references and throughout the other film, I mean, androids are typically known to be pretty strong. They're not just a bag of wires. I mean, there's metal, there's all sorts of things in there. And, they make them strong just because they can, I guess, and defend themselves and that sort of thing. So they're not weak little things that we have seen in the past that can just be, oh, here's a person just pushing you around, unless he wanted her to, but David wasn't pretending to be a human, so it wouldn't make sense that he would just allow her to throw him around like that. And Vickers also seems very cold and very distant for a lot of it. There's a lot of emotion that seems to be lacking out of her. Another thing is that her Metapod that she has, the medical device that she has in her room that she's bragging about kind of in the beginning of the film, it's calibrated for men. And yeah, that could have been an oversight that, somebody screwed up or she didn't look into it because she hasn't had to use it before, but it's just really weird that she has something that big and expensive, and yet it's calibrated for men only. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that we don't see David go through her dreams when she's in hyperspace like he seems to be doing to a lot of the other people who are asleep. And we don't see it. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. You'd still be kind of interested to see what's going on in her head, or Waylon would, or something, because David seemed to be an extension of doing what Waylon wanted for that trip. So it's one of those things where it's left with a lot of gray area where nothing is ever fully explained. We never see Captain Vickers get put into danger to be able to tell whether or not the aliens are even coming after her, and I would think that as far as the little face hugger snake kind of things going on there, probably would not be interested in a robot, because I'm assuming that they could tell the difference between a beating heart and a mechanical person. So we don't see that to know. We never see her eat, that I can recall at least. We don't see her body after the crash. It's just a clear, covered up and she's dead. And we have just no clear answers at all on what happened. So when you're looking for the answer of whether or not Captain Vickers was a human or an android, you're not going to figure it out necessarily by watching the film, but what I think is the situation is that she is a cyborg. And if you don't know, a cyborg is a human that has been given robot parts one way or another, so that they have mechanical features, but they still retain a lot of their humanistic qualities as well. So they have both robot and human qualities in them. And some of them can even have sex and children. And if you look back to Dragon Ball Z's Android 18, which android is a bad name, and they said that later that, oh, well, no, she actually had human parts. That's just what they called her in the lab kind of thing. But Android 18 marries Krillin, and they have a child named Marin. But she was immortal. She wasn't aging like everybody else was around her because she had so many different, robot parts in her that wasn't going to happen. And she was also very cold and very distant from a lot of people. Even her daughter, we don't see a lot of loving interaction with her in the show. And she's incredibly strong. And to me, that sounds exactly like Captain Vickers. Some cyborgs can even age and die depending on what parts are mechanical and what parts are human, and we see that in some versions of Victor Stone, which is Cyborg in the DC Comics, if you don't know. So I think, quite frankly, we will probably never get a firm answer, but I believe that Captain Vickers is a cyborg. There could have been a number of things that happened, but if you look at Waylon, he is so old, and Charlize Theron in the movie looks to be mid-30s to 40s. That would have, not been impossible for somebody to have a child that late in their life, but Waylon looks like he's maybe 120 at this point, so it just doesn't seem feasible that she's his biological daughter, unless maybe back in the day technology wasn't so good, they were trying to get to androids, they were experimenting, they were doing all sorts of things like that, and they thought they could make a human-robot combination as a cyborg, but the technology wasn't great. Human testing wasn't as available to them for one reason or another. So why not use the spare kid you have lying around to further science? Because after all, she's just a girl. She's not the son he always wanted. He made his own robot son later after that. And that kind of explains away a lot of the stuff if you sit down and watch it and watch it and watch it and think about it. Because if she's a cyborg, it makes sense for her to have both human and robot qualities that kind of interchange and still have emotions and still have, her own kind of free will, and not be so condemned to have to do what Waylon wants her to do like David seems to be. Like, David's very curious, but he's also very clear once Waylon is up that he's been working for him and that's been pulling the strings. So that's my thoughts.